Welcome to the Unstuck and Happy podcast. We all get stuck, but how long you stay there is up to you. I'm your host, John Polish, founder of the Unstuck Happiness Conference. And this is the show where we interview people who've overcome tremendous adversity and have emerged as leaders. So if you need a little inspiration and hope in your day, get ready, because here comes another great Unstuck story. Welcome. This is our 9th episode, fairly new show. And if you've been listening, you may notice that every episode I start off talking about how excited I am about today's guest. Well, when you produce your own podcast, you get to pick your guests. So that's the reason why I'm excited. I'm only picking people I'm excited about. And today is no exception. We have with us today MJ Callaway.
Callaway?
And so MJ, I have known for about a year and a half, but have not really gotten too much of an opportunity to speak with. But we do have a lot in common. We both have overcome tremendous adversities, and we have come up with systems to teach people how to get unstuck, so to speak. We've both written books on it. MJ has a new book out called Bounce Up.
Yes.
Stuck to Success, right?
Bounce Up, it's outpower adversity, boost resilience, and rebound higher.
Awesome. We're going to talk about the book in just a few moments. We have a lot in common. We are both currently serving as regional presidents for chapters of the National Speakers Association. I am the president of the Las Vegas chapter, and MJ is president of the Pittsburgh chapter, which I kind of hold an affinity for both the Pittsburgh and Ohio chapters. They're kind of a second home for me, being that I grew up an hour outside of Pittsburgh in Youngstown, Ohio. So it's very nice to see you here today, MJ.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I love your opening music. I mean, it just makes you want to bop and it makes you happy listening to it.
You should see the video. When I put this to video, during the beginning of this whole COVID quarantine thing, I went and got a new puppy. And talk about getting stuck. There is a video of my puppy trying to climb over totes and just can't get there. It is, to me, hysterical. So goes along with the music. It's perfect.
Oh, absolutely. And it goes along with your brand too. If the puppy was stuck.
Of course. So speaking of stuck to Success is the subtitle of your book. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Okay. So the book actually is a chronicle of my journey. Well, several journeys. I believe I have told you I have been through 3 different types of life crises. And the book is through it, I talk about each of those journeys and each time that I had an adversity and how I overcame it. But I also include 8 other people. And I like to say who have hit rock bottom. We all hit rock bottom and all of us bounced up. So it gives you an idea of how other people had hit that rock bottom, but it also gives you tips and techniques and tactics on how to bounce up so that you never have to stay stuck. So going back to your brand, it helps people get unstuck, but end up higher than they ever were before.
That's awesome. I love the whole concept. So my last book was 4D Strategies to Living Unstuck. And one of those Ds is developing your faith, which is really developing that belief that things can get better. And how we do that, one way is to surround ourselves with people who have these great stories of overcoming adversity. So you having 8 other people in your book, I hold Unstuck Happiness conferences where I'll have 8 speakers all sharing their story. I call it kind of a TED Talks meets Chicken Soup for the Soul. So okay. I'll get 8 people together and each person takes 20 minutes to share what happened to them, how they got over it, and what they do now to inspire other people. And that has launched this podcast as well. And hopefully this week, finishing the Unstuck and Happy documentary movie. So very much along the same lines is that we are taking people's stories and using them to help others see that there is a path, that there is hope, that they can get through it no matter how difficult things seem at the time.
Absolutely. And I like to say we all will get hit with adversity at some time or another in our life. And it isn't about I mean, of course, it's about the adversity. The stronger point is how high we can bounce up from that adversity. It's taking that adversity and saying, what can I do right now with what I have? And when we think that way, what can I do right now with what I have? It's a question. And then it takes us out of worry, it takes us out of fear, it takes us out of all that verbal drama, and it puts us on a path of problem solving. And when we get to that path of problem solving, it actually engages our brain to come up with solutions. So it gives us an opportunity to hit to hit that path to outpowering adversity, to boosting your resilience, to actually coming up in a better place than what you were before.
So what's the opposite of bouncing up?
Oh, a hacky sack. I say I say it's a hacky sack. A hacky sack hits the floor and it doesn't move unless you have some type of action with it. So I use that as an analogy. So if you're not going to bounce up, you can be that hacky sack. Or the other place is you bounce back to where you were. And if you bounce back to where you were, you haven't learned a lesson, you haven't improved your life, you haven't become stronger, because whatever had gotten you in that place in the first place, that space, you're going to land right back there, and then you're going to hit adversity again. So that would I would say the hacky sack and bouncing back to where you are.
Yeah, a big part of my content, what I teach is that we are trying constantly, especially after tragedy, to bounce back and get back to where we were before. But the truth is that once something like that happens, you will never be the same. There is no returning to normal. You have to create a new normal. But I think there's so much emphasis on trying, and I'd say it over and over again, trying to get life back to normal as quick as possible. Normal is going to be completely different after you've experienced any kind of tragedy.
Absolutely. It's your new normal. It will never be the same. It's a new normal. I mean, let's look at what we're going through today, with the COVID crisis. Life will never be the same as it was before this. It is coming up with a new normal that works for you, that you can be positive about, that you can look forward to, that you can pull in your social circle, your family, to make it a better place for what you have to deal with at that time.
So there's several ways that we can explain this and, you know, different analogies that we can use. Does bouncing up have a certain affinity to you? Is there a reason why you chose that?
So I would say a few things. One, I'm an avid sports fan, so I use a lot of sports analogies, and I do have a couple of people in my book. I tell Jim Tressel's story, the former Ohio coach, football coach.
So
So I share his story, but I
just a
also,
preference. I am a Youngstown State graduate. Jim Tressel's the current president there, and I spent 2 weeks in spring camp with Tressel. My junior year of college, I transferred to Youngstown State and decided not to actually play football in the fall, and that was the first year he won a national championship. So, anytime you can promote, Coach, I love it.
he was awesome when I interviewed him. So over the summer, he was awesome. So for me, using any type of ball analogy works. But when I think about a ball, you put it down, you bounce it down, it bounces up. And most often, depending upon how hard you bounce it, it bounces higher than whenever you threw it down from whatever position it is. So that analogy for me is always uplifting. The other reason is because I use play up a lot. So going back to sports, when my son played college, he played basketball all through school, and he always played up. He played with players that were better than him to make him better. So that's the other reason why I use bounce up. But I will say that someone had said to me, MJ, I don't know what to say about you. I want to use the word bounce back, but bounce back doesn't fit because you just keep getting stronger and stronger. Each time you go through an adversity, you get stronger. And they said, but I can't figure out what words to use for you. And that actually, when she said that to me, I looked at her and I said, bounce up. It's bounce up. So it was through a conversation that the title of the book and the whole brand came about.
That's awesome. So I've been thinking about, I'm one of those guys, people tease me. I'm kind of like I don't know, Carrot Top or Gallagher of public speaking. I'm always using props or visuals to help get the point across. And I was thinking about your concept of bounce up. And I actually had an opportunity to use this in conversation this week. So by all means, I want to share this with you. The idea of bouncing at all, we've got to hit bottom before we come up. And usually the pain point is when we hit bottom. That's when it hurts the most, right? And
Right.
I've watched people, and I've done this myself, as we know we're going through something that's going to be painful. We know that this is going to hurt. So what we do is we try to soften the blow. And we try to make it
Mm.
easier hitting bottom, right? So what happens if you take a basketball and hold it straight out at arm's length and drop it, right?
Hmm.
If you try and slow down the process of that ball, it'll have less impact when it lands, right?
Right.
However, if you were just to hold it out and drop it, that ball will never return to your hand. It'll bounce up, but it will never bounce up as high as from where you left it unless you apply force.
Right.
And so by applying a little bit of force, a basketball player will apply a little force to that ball to get it to return to his hand.
Hmm.
That way he has more control over the situation. He knows the impact it's going to make, but he also knows that he's in control. And that's what they call dribbling in basketball.
Right.
But when we try and control the pain, we try and stop it from happening, what we're really doing is we're losing control. We're losing that ability to rebound, to bounce up. So,
Great analogy. Perfect.
yeah. So that takes us to you. What did you have to bounce up from? Tell us a little bit about you said 3 stories.
Three stories. So the first one was actually now 10 years ago. I had left a 20 some year marriage. My former spouse had an addiction to alcohol. And unfortunately, one night and there was many things that had happened prior to this. This was like the, okay, we're finished moment. The one night when he lost control of his common sense, due to alcohol, he tried to run me over with his truck. So that, needless to say, I left and started over. So I started over with $500, very few things, personal possessions, and I rented a 2 bedroom apartment. Which house that I had left, I had completely redecorated it from the ground up. So that was a big change for me. And I had quit a position I had that was a seller position, and I had taken a position with a national builder, an on your site builder in sales. And I didn't know anything, though I knew about sales, I didn't know anything about building a house. So I had to learn. This is so funny when they had asked me, well, do you know what a header and a footer is? Well, I have a writing background, so I said, sure. I didn't realize, there was a difference between what they were talking about and what I was talking about. So that was quite interesting. And that was definitely a bounce up moment. What was great, we always learn something from everything we do. What was great about that is, believe me, I can read blueprints like there's no tomorrow. Number one, I actually sold custom homes out of a storefront. So I was able to paint a picture of what someone wanted in their house. But I was the only female that hit number one for a national builder. And I was selling 3 times my sales quota. So, you know, a great learning experience. And when we think about adversity from that perspective, there's so much that we can gain from it and gather. So that was
Awesome.
number one.
Okay.
So number two and number three actually happened within the last 3.5 years. In fall of 2016, I was diagnosed with an aggressive cancer, and I was given a 20% chance of surviving over 5 years if chemo didn't work, and chemo had a 50% chance of working. So the odds were definitely against me. I implemented a number of things that I share in my book, those strategies that keep us. You know what it's like. You have to implement those strategies and come up with a game plan. And improvise is a key fundamental. Improvise is one of the fundamentals I talk about in my book. And to give you an example of that, there was one of the things, it was a very intense treatment plan. The PA told me at one point that they would not give the cocktail they gave me to someone with a compromised immune system because they wouldn't make it. And that means everything, whatever you're thinking, it's exactly what it meant. So one of the suggestions they gave me was to walk to push, the fluids out, to push the chemicals out. Well, it was December and January in Pittsburgh. It was freezing. It was cold outside. I couldn't go to a gym because my immune system had tanked. I could only go to the mall, for so often. So what I ended up doing was I joined Phipps Conservatory, a beautiful conservatory, and I joined as a member. It was so inexpensive. It was somewhere around $50 for a year membership. And I would go there almost every day to walk. And I would go in the morning when there weren't that many people there. I didn't have to worry about crowds and catching anything. So improvise is hugely important as a fundamental for me. So that was the second crisis. And then in June of 2019, I was diagnosed again. So had to go through some major surgeries, to overcome that, to get it out, more or less to say. And during the time for, from fall of 2016 to 9, what I do is I implement what I call flip it. Every negative word associated with those two times, I had flipped it. And for the cancer, I called it the pink pumpkin, the tumor. For the chemo, I called it magic wand because it was going to magically make this disappear. Buzz, I had to go through radiation. So buzz, radiation, the machine is huge and it makes all these clicking sounds. So it reminded me of Buzz Lightyear. And when you talk about Buzz Lightyear, you have to smile. It's just fun. So I implemented positive words to overcome those negative words. So that's what I did for crisis number two and crisis number three.
I love it because I very much the same. Have had several different tragedies in my life, and the first ones I was clueless. I had no idea what I was doing, and I handled them very poorly. And now that what's funny is I wrote my book, 40 Strategies to Living Unstuck, which is a system for processing your emotions. I did not go through a tragedy and say, okay, I'm on step one. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. It was in hindsight looking back and thinking, okay, here's a bunch of things I tried that didn't work. And here's what finally worked. And oh, wait, there actually is a system in that. And then as I start experiencing new things, I automatically put myself through that process. Okay, where am I in this process? What am I really thinking about here? And then I go through and I can use it. And the majority of people they don't have that skill set because they've not been through it and they haven't had an opportunity to systematize it. So that's why what we're doing, I think, is so powerful because we can actually help people think that way when they're going through it.
Absolutely. And well said there, because I agree with you wholeheartedly. I didn't know what I was doing. Like the first time that I went through the crisis, what I'm calling personal crisis, I didn't know what I was doing, what strategies I had put in place until afterwards when it really hit me was my one of my church leaders asked me if I would lead a small group, a woman's small group. And I said, "Sure, but I'm not exactly sure what I will talk about." And she said, "MJ, you walk with a purpose. Like think about how you walked through that adversity." She said, because not only were you going through a not so fun divorce, because there was, as you know, going through a divorce isn't always fun, not always amicable. And I was also dealing with somebody who had an addiction, which didn't make it any easier. She said, you went through that and look at the success that you had in spite of it. So, and whether the adversity pushed me to be that much more successful or whether it was my own determination, I'm not sure. But along the way, like you said, you created a system that you didn't even realize you created. And you threw out what didn't work and you continued doing what did work.
I'll make it even funnier, I guess, if you will. I mentioned I use a lot of props and visuals when I speak. And my second book, The 40 Strategies of Living Unstuck, at one point I was organizing a speech and I thought, okay, I like this prop. I like this thing that I'm doing. This is fun. This has a good point. And I'm like, but really there's nothing tying them together. It's just a whole bunch of points that I'm making without any real system behind it. So I looked and I sat down, okay, what does this one really mean? What does this one really mean? And I actually wrote out the 4D strategies, 4 strategies that started with the letter D, originally as a way to keep all my props in my speech and have it make more sense.
Nice.
But then I look back and I'm like, oh my God, this works. So I started doing retreats based on those strategies. I started and in my most recent divorce, I put myself through it. And I'm like, wow, this actually works. But I wouldn't have thought of it if I wasn't so tied to those props. I'm like, I got to keep it in my speech. How can I make it make sense? And just a way that, 10 years ago, I would have never imagined thinking of. So it's funny sometimes where that inspiration comes from, but once you
Right.
have it, it's so valuable.
I love that you use props. I use some too. I use a hacky sack, which was why that easily came out of my head. And then I go immobilize. There's 3 roadblocks I share to my audiences and also in my book. And the hacky sack is immobilized. Without action, we stay where we are. We're immobilized. And then I use a super ball. And I love whenever I bounce it because I usually pull somebody from the audience, and I make sure that they have on some type of soft heeled shoes so that they can chase after the super ball. But I'll bounce it, and with the super ball you never know where it's going, so to try to chase it, and I use that as the verbal drama in our head. It bounces all over, and if we don't control it, it gets out of control like a super ball. So I use those, and then the last one that I use is, those kids sticky monster balls. They're kind of gummy, and if you throw it against the wall, it sticks to the wall.
I'm going to say yes, but not really.
Okay, so the next time I see you, I'll have to give you one or I'll send you one. So anybody who has kids or nieces and nephews might have come across them. A lot of times they're sold in like the gumball machines as quarter or 50-cent prizes. So when they stick against, you throw it against a wall and they stick, sometimes they'll walk down the wall. But I use that fear. Fear grips us and fear doesn't let go, similar to those sticky monster balls that climb down the wall. So it's being taking control again, controlling that. And when I like to say flip it, turn that negative to a positive or ask questions so that it takes you out of that fear, that uncertainty.
And the control thing for me, it's what I found. You mentioned drama, the verbal
Hmm.
drama. I actually do a bit on controlling drama. I had a great opportunity about a year and a half ago when I was working on this last book to go sit in the home of a Hollywood director and talk about how they create drama in TV and movies. And then reverse engineered that to talking about controlling drama in the workplace and at home. And real quick, what this director taught me is that most directors will shoot a scene, and then after the scene, they'll turn to an actor and say, you know what, I need more anger, I need more rage, whatever the emotion is. And he said that every time they go back and reshoot the scene, every time the actor will do the exact same thing they did before, just louder. Because what's more drama, what's more anger. So what he does differently is, instead, before they shoot anything, he gets inside the head of the character and over exaggerates the expectation, gets them to buy into an expected outcome. When this happens, it's going to be amazing or horrible or whatever. And then when they shoot the scene for the first time, they get a natural emotion out of the actor. And it ends up being better because it's real. Sometimes it's different than what they were going for. And I thought about that. And what I teach is that every problem is a result of an unmet expectation. When you expect things to be a certain way and when it's not, it creates a gap, and we fill the gap with a negative emotion. The problem is that we can't control drama because we all act like that first director, and we try to control the emotion. We try to put all the focus and the attention on that emotion, and we can't control emotions. And I always tell people, if you don't believe me, go home and tell your significant other to just calm down and see what happens, right? No one ever calms down. But instead, if we can control the expectation that created the emotion, that creates the output. So in other words, I'm feeling sad. Don't worry about focusing on whether you're feeling sad. Think about why you're feeling sad and what you can do differently to change that. Rather than just saying, okay, I'm feeling sad, I'm going to be happy now. It's really not focusing on flipping the emotion, but flipping the situation, the circumstances that created it.
Yes, love that. Absolutely makes sense there. So one of the things that I like to do in my with my audiences is what I call the reset button. And it's an activity we go through. At the end of it, because what made me think of it is when you said, if you tell someone to calm down. So if you tell someone to calm down, or don't be nervous or something like that, it actually makes them more nervous, or makes them more frustrated, or whatever emotion it is. So instead, I have them focus on two words: I'm excited. I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. So when they focus on I'm excited, so then it's flipping it, but it's also having their brain engage on them being excited, and it takes away that emotion that you're talking about. So yes, we do some similar things with our
Yeah,
audiences here.
definitely. So why did you decide to start speaking and sharing?
I started to speak back in 2004, 2006. I have two books that was published under what I call my pen name that were about organization. And it actually was an organic thing that happened. People read the book, and then they belonged to an organization. They asked me if I would speak about organization. So I did start then. And then as I went into life changes, as I shared, I got out of the speaking and didn't get back into it until 7 years ago. The reason why and what I did at that point was I talked about most of my training and my speaking engagements were around sales, and more so around rejections, why rejections happen, how to overcome rejections. And I would do some motivational speaking that had to do with my story, my first story. So when I was going through the cancer for the last two times, the I had more people that reached out to me. I didn't share it a lot, that said, MJ, how did you stay so positive? Like, what did you do? Like, you were giving a very dire, prognosis. The odds were against you. How did you get through it? And, one was what I call unshakability. That's one of my fundamentals. And I believed, my faith, because faith is very important to me, my faith and also my belief that I would get through it. And I thought, if I can't share that message with others, it was something that was there's a reason I went through three, not one, not two, but three crises. And there's a purpose for going through them. I created these systems to get through it. And if I couldn't share those systems with other people, then really shame on me. because I'm stopping someone else from bouncing up.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
absolutely. Some people will say to me at times, how is it that you can go around and talk about sad things? And I don't feel like there's anything sad about it. I lost one of my partners early on to cancer. Um, he worked with me on my first two conferences. He was talking about living a bucket list lifestyle while doing with cancer. And we did two events together. He spoke at my first two events and helped out. And then afterwards, him and I sat down and said, we need to share this. We need to get this out. We need to do one in every state. So we set a goal to do an unstuck in every state. And we actually lost him
Mm,
before we could do our third. Um, but in the documentary, one of the stories, there's four different stories in it. And one of them is his, because he literally did live a bucket list style lifestyle and was happy and positive up until his very last day. And I think it's important for people to see that, one of the things that he said, and I don't mean to diminish anybody who's suffering and going through it, because cancer is absolutely a horrible, horrible thing. Um,
mhm.
but he made the comment at one point, he's like, I wasn't really living until I got a terminal diagnosis. And then that like really set him into everything that he did, and was very inspirational through it.
It gives you, when you get a prognosis, whatever stage or whatever your odds are or your stats that they give you, it does do something. I mean, it makes you appreciate life more. It gives you, we're not promised tomorrow, and it makes that message so much stronger that we're not promised tomorrow. And you appreciate every day. I mean, every day I wake up and I'm like, okay, let's make this a bounce up day. Like that's and then my second one is, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice in it. So those are my two that I do every single morning. And it's that gratitude. You think the gratitude when you face, or someone faces some type of prognosis or some type of deep loss, it does give you a wake up call. It's definitely a wake up call.
Especially appreciate the day to day aspect of it, because one of the things I say all the time is resilience is easy. When your back's against the wall, it's easy to be great. It's when you're alone in those quiet moments and the day to day stuff that follows, that's when it really starts to get to you. And that's when you have to, constantly retrain your brain and remind yourself that, there is more.
Absolutely. I like to use the word proactive. That is, I use that as opposed to reactive or any any word similar to that. I like proactive because it makes, for me, it puts me in control. And even for situations that we're not in control of, because let's face it, we can't control everything, but it gives me the ability to control what I can control, to make the choice according to what I've been dealt with at that time. So when we make the choice, we are more in control. We have a choice every day, regardless of whatever we're facing. We have the choice. Am I going to choose today to be happy? That's one of your words. Or am I going to be stuck? We have that choice. Whatever we're dealt with, we have a choice.
Yeah, I think the hardest part is when you're faced with a situation, a tragedy or whatever, we want to naturally assign blame. We want to have a finger to point
Yes.
to and say, okay, if this didn't happen, and it's all part of the drama that I mentioned. And, it's hard. What's really hard is when there's an obvious person to blame. When there's an obvious,
Mhm.
this person has done wrong. Uh, one of the groups that I've been working with are victims of the Vegas shooting, and there's an obvious person to point to there, right?
Right.
But if we allow that to continue to be our mindset, to have that finger to blame, that finger to point to, it holds us back. And instead, we just have to
Mhm.
look for, okay, what can I do with this? How can I turn this to a positive? How can I still pick up and move on? But a lot of people don't want to do that when they can just sit there and point a finger.
And maybe a question to someone who would rather blame someone, 'cause I call it the blame game, and I talk about that in my book as a roadblock. The does it make you happy to blame someone else? Will it keep you stuck, or to stop doing it, will it get you out of being immobilized?
Absolutely. Is it getting you any closer to what you want out of life? And what can you do to get there? And I always say the most successful people in the world are not the people who, it's not because they don't have adversity, they don't have trials. It's that they have learned to pivot and move in a new direction. And the rest of us sit there staring at the problem going, what happened? What can I do?
Mhm.
So
And instead, it's to go to that next step. And the next step is, okay, what can I do right now with what I have? Let's
speaking of which, what are you most excited about coming up in the future?
Oh, I love doing these podcasts. So fortunately, friends like you, colleagues like you have asked me. So that's one thing. I love sharing this message in my story and the stories in my book with other people. And I get the opportunity to do that whenever I have colleagues like you who invite me. So the one of the things that I have found whenever I have gone through the three different adversities is I always have a goal at the end of it. The first one was to go on a cruise. I love to travel. And it was to go on a cruise because during my marriage, it was one thing I had always wanted to do. My former spouse never really wanted to, and we kept putting it off, and it never happened. So it was a goal to do that after the first adversity. The second one, the second adversity was to go to Influence, NSA's big conference of the year. I had finished radiation on July 5th, and I got on a plane on July 6th to go to Influence. So that was my second big goal.
That was
So, which
2017, right? I know
2017,
that because I
yes.
missed that Influence because July 8th is when I got married. So I
Okay.
missed it for a wedding, and I so should not have missed it.
Well, we do things in life that feels right at that time. So it
Yeah.
felt right at that time. So this one is because I had my last surgery in December, actually December 26th of 2019. So my goal was to go to Ireland in June. Well, as you know, all of this has happened, COVID happened. So that was canceled, but I am looking forward to going to Ireland in June of 2021. So that's a big goal for me, a personal goal for me. My professional goal with that is I want to try to get a speaking engagement while I'm over there.
Tax write off, of
So
course.
to be able to say, "Oh, I spoke in Ireland," would be awesome. So that's a big one. I have an online class that I did a soft launch to that I will be rolling out actually this month in May. So that's a big goal for me to look forward to and excitement.
How can people find that course if they want to?
So they can email me at mj@mjcallaway.com. I will only take 8 people, and it's a small group class. So it will be going up on my website mid May. Not sure whenever this podcast will come out. So they can definitely email me for it for any more information. And I do have, if they follow me on Facebook, I have a couple of testimonies on that. They can follow me at MJ Callaway. My LinkedIn profile is under MJ Callaway too.
I have one more important question for you.
Okay.
Will the Steelers be able to bounce up this year?
Yes. Yes. So Coach Tomlin's wife, Kia, was actually one of my clients. So I walked her through a sales system for her and her staff and created a training book for her. So with training modules and questions and so forth. So yes, I'm going to say yes, they are.
Awesome. We're getting the Raiders here in Las Vegas this year, but still a Steelers fan at heart. And
Yes. Go black and gold.
I can't finish this podcast without saying, see Yin's guys next week.
Oh,
Guys, is that right? It's been a
Yeah,
while.
that yinzer. So it is
Yeah.
definitely a yinzer word there.
Alrighty. So MJ, thank you very much. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will catch you again next week.
All right. Thank you so much, John, for having me on.
Thank you. Make sure you head over to unstuckandhappy.com, where you'll find the video version of all of our podcasts, as well as information about upcoming Unstuck Happiness conferences and moving beyond personal development retreats. Those are amazing. Make sure you join us again next week for another great Unstuck story. And in the meantime, keep living unstuck and happy.